Henry Morley on Agrippa's 3 Books of Occult Philosophy. Read by Dan Atrell. Little disguised by Hebrew admixture, and little pervaded by the speculations of the Platonists of Alexandria, Philo the Jew, Plotinus, and Iamblichus, whom the young student Agrippa quotes most frequently, we have again the Attic Moses, Plato, speaking through a young and strong heart to the world. Very great was this influence of Plato in this period of awakening to thought. Nothing was known by experience of nature, for little had been learnt since the time when Plato, theorizing upon nature, owned it to be impossible to arrive at any certain result in our speculations upon the creation of the visible universe and its authors. Wherefore, he said, even if we should only advance reasons not less probable than those of others, you should still be content. In this spirit alone, Cornelius Agrippa taught his age. Quote, there are these marvels well accredited. There is this cumbrous and disjointed mass of earthly, sensible experience, which there is no way of explaining left to me but one. I accept the marvels, foolish as they seem. They are as well accredited as things more obviously true. With God, all things are possible. In God, all things consist. I will adopt Plato's belief that the world is animated by a moving soul, and from the soul of the world I will look up to its creator. I cannot rest content with a confused mass of evidence. I will animate with my own soul and a faith in its divine origin the world about me. I will adopt the glorious belief of Plato that we sit here as in a cavern with our faces held from looking to the cavern's mouth, down which a light is streaming and pours in a flood over our heads, broken by shadows of things moving in the world above. We see the shadows on the wall, hear echoes, and believe in all as the one known truth of substance and of voice, although these are but the images of the superiors. I also will endeavor to climb up and out of the cave into the land flooded with sunlight. I connect all that we see here with Plato's doctrine of superior ideas. I subdue matter to spirit. I will see true knowledge in apparent foolishness, and connect the meanest clod with its divine creator. I will seek to draw down influences, and to fill my soul with a new strength imparted by the virtue of ideas streaming from above. The superior manifest in the inferior is the law of nature manifested in the thing created. My soul is not sufficient for itself. Beyond it and above it lie eternal laws, subtle, not having substance or form, yet the cause of form and substance. I cannot hope to know them otherwise than as ideas. To unborn generations they will be revealed, perhaps. To me, they are ideas, celestial influences, working intelligences. I believe in them, and I desire to lay open my soul to their more perfect apprehension. They are not God, though God created them. They are not man, though they have by divine ordainment formed him. The more I dwell upon their qualities, the more I long for the divine, the more shall I be blessed by the reception of their rays. The more intensely I yearn heavenward, the more shall I bring down heaven to dwell in my soul. End quote. So we may hear, if we will, the spirit of the young inquirer pleading to us from across the centuries. And if our own minds ever yearned for an escape from the delusions of the grosser sense, and the restrictions set by the crowds on free inquiry, there is no true heart that will not say, "You labored well, my brother." Agrippa and the Rosicrucians. The secrets to be talked over between Cornelius and his friend related to that study of the mysteries of knowledge in which the Theosophists assisted one another. Secret societies, chiefly composed of curious and learned youths, had by this time become numerous, and numerous especially among the Germans. Not only the search after the philosopher's stone, which was then worthy to be prosecuted by enlightened persons, but also the new realms of thought laid open by the first glance at Greek literature, and by the still more recent introduction of a study of the Hebrew language, occupied the minds of these associated scholars. Such studies often carried those who followed them within the borders of forbidden ground, and therefore secrecy was a condition necessary to their freedom of inquiry. Towards the close of the 16th century, such associations, the foundations of which had been a desire to keep thought out of fetters, were developed into the form of brotherhoods of Rosicrucians. Physician, theosophist, chemist, and now, by the mercy of God, Rosicrucian became then the style in which a brother gloried. The brotherhoods of Rosicrucians are still commonly remembered, but in the social history of Europe, they are less to be considered than those first confederations of theosophists, which nursed indeed mystical errors gathered from the Greeks and Jews, but out of whose theories there was developed a pure spiritualism that entered into strife with what was outwardly corrupt and sensual in the body of the Roman Church, and thus prepared the way for the more vital attacks of the Reformers. When first Greek studies were revived, the monks commonly regarded them as essentially adverse to Roman interests, and the very language seemed to them infected with the plague of heresy. It became almost a proverb with them that to be known for a grammarian was to be a reputed heretic. Not seldom, indeed, in later times, has John Reuchlin, who, for his Greek and Hebrew scholarship, was called, after the manner of his day, the Phoenix of the Germans, and who was the object of an ardent hero worship to men like Cornelius Agrippa, been called also the father of the Reformation. Certainly Luther, Erasmus, and Melanchthon had instruction from him. By him it was that Schwarzerd had been taught to call himself Melanchthon, that is, Schwarzerd, black earth, in Greek, and many will remember how after his death, Erasmus, in a pleasant dialogue, raised his old friend to the rank of saint, and prayed to him, "O holy soul, be favorable to the languages, be favorable to those that love honorers of the languages, be propitious to the sacred tongues." But Reuchlin, for the taste of smoke in it, Reuchlin as Riki, his name was turned into the Greek form Capnio. Reuchlin, or Capnio, never passed as a reformer beyond detestation of the vices of the priesthood. Like Cornelius, who began his life before the public as a scholar by an act of homage to his genius, Reuchlin loved liberty and independence, cherished the idol of free conscience, but never fairly trusted himself to its guidance. To the last, an instinct of obedience to the Church governed his actions, and the spiritual gold he could extract from Plato, Aristotle, or the wonderful Kabbalah of the Jews was in but small proportion to the dross fetched up with it from the same ancient mines. A contemporary notion of the Reformation, not without some rude significance in this respect, is said to have been obtruded upon Charles V by a small body of unknown scholars who appeared before him in 1530 when he was in Germany. He had been dining with his brother Ferdinand, and did not refuse their offer to produce a comedy in dumb show. One dressed as a scholar, labeled Capnio, brought before the emperor a bundle of sticks, some crooked and some straight. He laid them down in the highway and departed. Then entered another, who professed to represent Erasmus. He looked at the sticks, shook his head, made various attempts to straighten the crooked ones, and finding that he could not do so, shook his head over them again and again, put them down where he had found them, and departed. Then came an actor, labeled Luther, with a torch, who set all that was crooked in the bundle blazing. When he was gone, entered one dressed as an emperor, who tried in vain to put out the fire with his sword. Last came Pope Leo X, to whom, grieving dismally over the spectacle before him, were put 2 pails brought. One contained oil, the other water. His Holiness, to quell the fire, poured over it the bucket full of oil. While the flame attracted all eyes by the power beyond mastery with which it shot up toward heaven, the actors made their escape undetected. Now, it was over the crooked sticks of Capnio and many other matters difficult of comprehension that Cornelius and his confederates were bent in curious and anxious study. The bearer of the letters said Landulf, in excusing himself on the plea of illness from a winter journey to a friend at Avignon, quote, "The bearers of these letters is a German, native of Nuremberg, but dwelling at Lyons. And he is a curious inquirer after hidden mysteries, a free man restrained by no fetters, who, impelled by I know not what rumor concerning you, desires to sound your depths." End quote. That the man himself might be sounded, as one likely to have knowledge of some important things, and that if it seemed fit he should be made a member of their brotherhood, was the rest of the recommendation of this person by Landulf to his friend Agrippa. At Lyons were assembled many members of his league, awaiting the arrival of the young soldier-philosopher. His early taste for an inquiry into the mysteries had caused him to take all possible advantage, as a scholar, of each change of place and each extension of acquaintance among learned men who were possessors of rare books. He had searched every accessible volume that might help him in the prosecution of the studies that had then a fascination not only for him, but for not a few of the acutest minds in Christendom. At that time there was, in the modern sense, no natural science, the naturalists of Greece and Rome being the sole authorities in whom the learned could put trust. Of the miraculous properties of plants and animals, and parts of animals, even at the close of the 16th century, careful and sober men placed as accepted knowledge many extravagant ideas on record. At the beginning of the century, when a belief in the influences of the stars, in the interferences of demons, and in the most wonderful properties of bodies was the rule among learned and unlearned, Luther himself not excluded from the number, an attempt to collect and group, if it might be, according to some system, the most recondite secrets of what passed for the divine ordering of nature, was in no man's opinion foolish, though in the opinion of the greater number, criminal. Belief in the mysteries of magic, not want of belief, caused men to regard with enmity and dread researches into secrets that might give to those by whom they were discovered subtle and superhuman power, through possessing which they would acquire an influence, horrible to suspect, over their fellow creatures. Detaching their search into the mysteries of the universe from all fear of this kind, the members of such secret societies as that to which Cornelius belonged gathered whatever fruit they could from the forbidden tree, and obtained mutual benefit by frank exchange of information. Cornelius had already, by incessant search, collected notes for a complete treatise upon magic, and of these, not a few were obtained from Reuchlin's Hebrew Christian way of using the Kabbalah. From Avignon, after a short stay, Cornelius Agrippa went to Lyons, and remaining there some weeks, compared progress with his friends, and no doubt also formally divested himself of any further responsibility connected with the Spanish enterprise. Towards the end of this year, a friend at Cologne, Theodoric, Bishop of Cyrene, wrote, expressing admiration of him, as of one among so many thousands of Germans who at sundry times and places had displayed in equal degree power to labor vigorously as a man at arms as well as a man of letters. Who does not know, the bishop asks, how few of many thousands have done that? He envies those that thus earn the wreath of Mars without losing the favor of Minerva, and calls the youth in arms a man, in scholarship a teacher. To escape the soldier's life of bondage seems to be now the ambition of the scholar. With the world before him, in the 23rd year of his age, well born, distinguished among all who knew him for the rare extent of his attainments, Cornelius, attended by his servant Stephen, quitted his friends at Lyons, and rode to Autun, where he was received in the abbey of a liberal and hospitable man, physician, theologian, and knight by turns, Monsieur Champier, who, having been born at Saint-Saphorin-le-Château, near Lyons, was called Saint-Phorien Champier, or Campegius, and who, not content with his own noble ancestry, assigned himself by right of the Campegius to the family of the Campeggi of Bologna, and assumed its arms. He studied at Paris Litera Humaniora, at Montpellier medicine, and practiced at Lyons. He lived to obtain great fame, deserving title, and losing after his death all. It was not until 5 years after this visit from Cornelius Agrippa that Saint-Phorien, acting as a body physician to the Duke of Lorraine, was knighted on the battlefield of Marignano. Among his writings, those which most testify his sympathy with the inquiries of Cornelius are a book on the miracles of Scripture, a life of Arnold of Villanova, and a French version of the Sibylline Oracles. This Champier then sympathized with the enthusiasm of the young theosophist, and under his roof the first venture of Cornelius before the world of letters seems to have been planned. In the last week of May, we find that he has sent his servant Stephen to fetch debris from Dole, has summoned Antonius Xanthus from Niverne, and wishes in association with Saint-Phorien to arrange a meeting with Landulf at any convenient place and time. He has something in hand concerning which he wishes to take counsel with his comrades. A few days afterwards, he and Landulf are at Dole together, and while Cornelius has left Dole for a short time, his friend sends word to him that he has engaged on his behalf the interest of an archbishop, who desires greatly to see him, and boasts that he can give information of some things unknown perhaps even to him. The archbishop is impatient to see the person who has stored up from rare books, even those written in Greek and Hebrew, so great a number of the secrets of the universe. Landulf, to content him, antedates the time appointed for his friend's return, and while reporting this, adds that there are many at Dole loud in the praise of Cornelius, and none louder than himself. The influence of his associates is evidently at work on his behalf among the magnates of the town and university of Dole, and learned men in the adjoining towns of Burgundy, for it is at Dole that he resolved to make his first public appearance as a scholar by expounding in a series of orations Reuchlin's book on the Mirific Word. At Chalons, however, Cornelius fell sick of a summer pestilence from which he was recovering on the 8th of July. As soon as health permitted, he returned to Dole, where there was prepared for him a cordial reception. The mistress of Dole and Burgundy was Maximilian's daughter, Margaret of Austria, who, in this year of Agrippa's life, was 29 years old. She was already twice a widow. When affianced twice, once vainly to France, a second time to Spain, and likely to perish in a tempest before reaching her appointed husband, she had wit to write a clever epitaph upon herself. Her Spanish husband died almost after the first embrace, and she had since, after 4 years of wedded happiness, lost her true husband, Philibert of Savoy. She was 24 years old when that happened, and resolved to make an end of marrying. In 1506, after the death of Archduke Philip, her father Maximilian, being guardian of his grandson Charles V, made Marguerite his governor over the Netherlands, and appointed her to rule over Burgundy and the Châtelois. Thus she came to be, in the year 1509, mistress at Dole. A clever, lively woman, opposed strongly to France, and always mindful of the interests of that house of Austria to which the family of young Agrippa was attached, Margaret was well known for her patronage of letters and her bounty towards learned men. It would be, therefore, a pleasant transfer of his loyalty, Agrippa thought, from Maximilian to Margaret, if he could thereby get rid of what he regarded as camp slavery under the one, and earn the favor of the other in the academic grove. To earn Margaret's goodwill and help upon the royal road to fortune was one main object of Cornelius when he announced at Dole that he proposed to expound Reuchlin's book, On the Mirific Word, in orations, to which, inasmuch as they were to be delivered in honor of the most serene Princess Margaret, the whole public would have gratuitous admission. Poor youth! He could not possibly have made a more genuine and honest effort, or one less proper to be used by evil men for the damnation of his character. Margaret was the princess to whom all others he was able to pay unaffected homage, and Reuchlin, then the boast of the Germans, was the scholar of whom, before every other, he, a German youth, might choose to hold discourse to the Burgundians. Of Reuchlin, Aegidius, chief of the Austin friars, wrote that he had blessed him and all mortals by his work. Philip Baroaldus the Younger wrote to him, quote, Pope Leo X has read your Pythagorean book, as he reads all good books, that is, greedily. Then it was read by the Cardinal de Medici, and I am expecting to have my turn. End quote. This book, which had been read by the Pope himself with eager pleasure, was a wonder of the day, and was in most perfect unison with the whole tone of Agrippa's mind. He really understood it deeply. It was most dear to him as a theosophist, and he was not to be blamed if he felt, also, that of all books in the world, there was none of which the exposition would so fully serve his purpose of displaying the extent and depth of his own store of knowledge. Exposition of the Kabbalah. Mainly upon what was said and written by Cornelius Agrippa in this 23rd year of his age, has been founded by the defamation by which, when he lived, his spirit was tormented and the hope of his existence miserably frustrated, by which, now that he's dead, his character comes down to us defiled. This victim, at least, has not escaped the vengeance of the monks, and his crime was that he studied vigorously in his salad days those curiosities of learning into which, at the same time, popes, bishops, and philosophers, mature in years, inquired with equal faith and almost equal relish, but less energy or courage. For a clear understanding of the ground, and of the perils of the ground now taken by Cornelius Agrippa, little more is necessary than a clear notion of what was signified by Reuchlin's book On the Mirific Word. But what has to be said of Reuchlin and his book, as well as of other matters that will hereafter concern the fortunes of Cornelius, requires some previous attention to a subject pretty well forgotten in these days by a people rich in other knowledge. We must recall, in fact, some of the main points of the Kabbalah. This account of the Kabbalah is derived from German sources, among which the chief are Brucker's Historia Philosophiae and the Kabbalah Denudata, a collection of old Kabbalistical writings arranged and explained by Christian Nor von Rosenroth. The traditions or Kabbalah of the Jews are contained in sundry books written by Hebrew rabbis and consist of a strange mixture of fable and philosophy varying on a good many points, but all adhering with sufficient accuracy to one scheme of doctrine. They claim high and remote origin. Some say that the first Kabbalah were received by Adam from the angel Raziel, who gave him, either while he yet remained in paradise, or else at the time of his expulsion, to console and help him, a book full of divine wisdom. In this book were the secrets of nature, and by knowledge of them, Adam entered into conversation with the sun and moon, knew how to summon good and evil spirits, to interpret dreams, foretell events, to heal, and to destroy. This book, handed down from father to son, came into Solomon's possession, and by its aid Solomon became master of many potent secrets. A Kabbalistic volume called the Book of Raziel was in the Middle Ages sometimes to be seen among the Jews. Another account said that the first Kabbalistical book was the Sefer Yetzirah, written by Abraham. But the most prevalent opinion was that when the written law was given on Mount Sinai to Moses, the Kabbalah, or mysterious interpretation of it, was taught to him also. Then Moses, it was said, when he descended from the mountain, entered Aaron's tent and taught him also the secret powers of the written word. And Aaron, having been instructed, placed himself at the right hand of Moses, and stood by while his sons, Eleazar and Ithamar, who had been called into the tent, received the same instruction. On the right and left of Moses and Aaron then sat Ithamar and Eleazar, when the 70 elders of the Sanhedrin were called in and taught the hidden knowledge. The elders finally were seated, that they might be present when all those among the common people who desired to learn came to be told those mysteries. Thus the elect of the common people heard but once what the Sanhedrin heard twice, the sons of Aaron 3 times, and Aaron 4 times repeated the secrets that had been made known to Moses by the voice of the Most High. Of this mystical interpretation of the Scripture, no person set down any account in writing, unless it was Esdras, but some Jews doubt whether he did. Israelites kept the knowledge of the doctrine by a pure tradition, but about 50 years after the destruction of Jerusalem, Akiba, a great rabbi, wrote the chief part of it in that book, Sefer Yetzirah, or the Book of Creation, which was foolishly ascribed by a few to Abraham. A disciple of the rabbi Akiba was Rabbi Simeon ben Yochai, who wrote more of the tradition in a book called the Zohar. The truth probably is that the literature of Kabbalism, which is full of suggestion derived from the Neoplatonics of Alexandria, began with the Jews of Alexandria under the first Ptolemies. In the book of Simeon ben Shattak, it went to Palestine, where it at first had been little heeded, but after the destruction of Jerusalem, it gained importance, and then rabbis Akiba and Simeon ben Yochai extended it. It is indisputable that Aristotle had been studied by the writer of the Sefer Yetzirah, the oldest known book of the Kabbalists. The Kabbalah went afterward with other learning to Spain, and that part of it at least which deals with Hebrew anagrams cannot be traced to an earlier time than the 11th century. Many rabbis, Abraham ben David, Saadia Gaon, Moses Botril, Moses bar Nachman, Eliezer of Garmiza, and others, have written Hebrew books for the purpose of interpreting the system of the Kabbalah, but it was, perhaps, not before the 8th century that it had come to receive very general attention from the Jews. The Kabbalah consisted of 2 portions, the symbolical and the real. The symbolical Kabbalah being the means by which the doctrines of the real Kabbalah were elicited. In the Hebrew text of the Scriptures, it was said that there is not only an evident, but there is also a latent meaning, and in its latent meaning are contained the mysteries of God and of the universe. It need scarcely be said that a belief in secret wisdom has for ages been inherited in the Oriental mind, and in the Scriptures, it was reasoned by later Jews, all wisdom must be, of necessity, contained. Of divine authorship, they cannot be like ordinary works of men. But if they were taken only in the natural sense, might it not be said that many human works contain marvels not less surprising and morally as pure? No, it was said, as we have entertained angels and regarded them as men, so we may entertain the words of the Most High, if we regard only their apparent sense and not their spiritual mystery. And so it was that through a blind excess of reverence, the inspired writings were put to superstitious use. The modes of examining their letters, words, and sentences for hidden meaning, in which wholly consisted the symbolical Kabbalah, were three, and these were called Gematria, Notarikon, and Themura. Gematria was arithmetical, when it consisted in applying to the Hebrew letters of a word the sense they bore as numbers, letters being used also for figures in the Hebrew as in the Greek. Then the letters in a word being taken as numbers and added up, it was considered that by another word, of which the letters added up came to an equal sum, might fairly be substituted by the arithmetical gematria. Figurative gematria deduced mysterious interpretations from the shapes of letters used in sacred writing. Thus, in Numbers 10:35, Bet means the reversal of enemies. This kind of interpretation was known by the name of Zurah. Architectonic gematria constructed words from the numbers given by Scripture when describing the measurements of buildings, as the ark or the temple. By Notarikon, more words were developed from the letters of a word, as if it had consisted of so many abbreviations, or else first and last letters of words, or the first letters of successive words were detached from their place and put side by side. By Themura, any word might be made to yield a mystery out of its anagram. These sacred anagrams were known as Zeruf. By the same branch of the symbolical Kabbalah, three systems were furnished in accordance with which words might be transformed by the substitution of one letter for another. The first of the systems, Albam, arranged the letters of the alphabet in 2 rows, one below another. The second, Athbath, gave another couple of rows. The third, Athbach, arranged them by pairs in 3 rows, all the pairs in the first row being the numerical value 10, in the second row 100, in the third 1,000. Any one of these forms might be consulted, and any letter in a word exchanged for another standing either in Albam, Athbath, or Athbach, immediately above it or below it, or on the right hand of it or the left. This was the symbolical Kabbalah, and the business of it was to extract, by any of the means allowed, the hidden meaning of the Scriptures. The real Kabbalah was the doctrine in this way elicited. It was theoretical, explaining divine qualities, the 10 Sefirot, the 4-fold Kabbalistical worlds, the 32 footprints of wisdom, the 50 doors to prudence, Adam Kadmon, etc. Or it was practical, explaining how to use such knowledge for the calling of spirits, the extinguishing of fires, the banishing of disease, and so forth. The theoretical Kabbalah contained, it was said by Christian students, many references to the Messiah. Its main points were 1. The tree, 2. The chariot of Ezekiel, 3. the work of creation, and 4. The Ancient of Days mentioned in Daniel. It concerns us most to understand the tree. The chariot of Ezekiel, or Ma'aseh Merkabah, was a description of prefigurements concerning ceremonial and judicial law. The doctrine of creation, in the book Leveshit, was a dissertation upon physics. The Ancient of Days treated of God and the Messiah in a way so mystical that Kabbalists generally declined to ascribe any meaning at all to the direct sense of the words employed. Of these things we need say no more, but of the Kabbalistical tree it will be requisite to speak in more detail. It was an arrangement of the 10 Sfirot. The word Sfirot is derived by some rabbis from a word meaning to count, because they are a counting of the divine excellence. Otherwise, it is considered to be an adaptation of the Greek word sphere, because it represents the spheres of the universe, which are successive emanations from the deity. In the beginning was Ar Ein Sof, the eternal light, from whose brightness there descended a ray through the firstborn of God, Adam Kadmon, and presently, departing from its straight course, ran in a circle, and so formed the first of the Sfirot, which was called Keter, or the crown, because superior to all the rest. Having formed this circle, the ray resumed its straight course until it again ran in a circle to produce the second of the 10 Sfirot, Chokmah, wisdom, because wisdom is the source of all. The same ray of divine light passed on, losing gradually, as it became more distant from its holy source, some of its power, and formed presently, in like manner, the third of the Sfirot, called Binah, or understanding, because understanding is the channel through which wisdom flows to things below, the origin of human knowledge. The fourth of the Sfirot is called Gedulah, or Chesed, greatness or goodness, because God, as being great and good, created all things. The fifth is Geburah, strength, because it is by strength that he maintains them, and because strength is the only source of justice in the world. The sixth of the Sfirot, Tferet, beauty or grace, unites the qualities of the preceding. The 4 last of the Sfirot are successively named Netzach, victory, Hod, honor, Yesod or Shalom, the foundation or peace, and finally Malkut, the kingdom. Each of the 10 also has a divine name, and their divine names, written in the same order, are Ehyeh, Yah, Yehovah, pronounced Elohim, Eloah, Elohim, Yehovah, pronounced as usual, Lord Sabaoth, Yehovah Sabaoth, Elkai, the living God, Adonai, the Lord. By these circles, our world is surrounded, but able to bring down with it powers that are the character of each. Divine light reaches us. These Sfirot, arranged in a peculiar manner, form the tree of the Kabbalists. They are also sometimes arranged in the form of a man, Adam Kadmon, according to the idea of the Neoplatonics that the figure of the world was that of a man's body. In accordance with another view derived from the same school, things in this world were supposed to be gross images of things above. Matter was said by the Kabbalists to have been formed by the withdrawal of the divine ray, by the emanation of which from the first source it was produced. Everything created was created by an emanation of the source of all, and that which being most distant contains least of the divine essence is capable of gradual purification, so that even the evil spirits will, in course of time, become holy and pure, and be assimilated to the brightness of the emanations of the Or Ein Sof. God, it was said, is all in all. Everything is part of the divine essence, with a growing, or perceptive, or reflective power. One or all, and by that which has one, all may be acquired. A stone may become a plant a beast, a man an angel, a creator. This kind of belief, which was derived also from the Alexandrian Platonists, led to that spiritual Kabbalism by which such Christians as Reuchlin and Agrippa profited. It connected them by a strong link with the divine essence, and they, feeling perhaps more distinctly than their neighbors that they were partakers of the divine nature, and might, by a striving after purity of soul and body, win their way to a state of spiritual happiness and power, cut themselves off from all communion with the sensuality that had become the scandal of the Church of Rome, and keenly perceived, as they expressed strongly, their sense of the degraded habits of the priests. It was in this way that the Christian Kabbalists assisted in the labors of the Reformation. Little more has to be said about their theory, and that relates to the four Kabbalistical worlds. These were placed in the four spaces between the upper Sphirot. Between the first and second was placed Atzilut, the outflowing, which contained the purest beings, the producers of the rest. Between the second and the third Sphirot was the world Briah, or the thrones, containing spirits less pure, but not material. They were classed into wheels, lightnings, lions, burning spirits, angels, children of God, and cherubim. Their prince was called Metatron. The world in the next interspace, called Yetzirah, angels approached more nearly to a material form, and the fourth, Asiya, was made wholly material. From this point, density increases till our world is reached. Asiya is the abode of the Klipot, or material spirits striving against God. They travel through the air, their bodies are of dense air, incorruptible, and they have the power to work in the material world. With Katoriel, Adam Belial, Esau, Aganiel, Uziel, Ogiel, Thomiel, and Thumiel for captains, they fight in two armies under their chiefs, Zamiel and Lilith. Their enemies are the angels, who contend against them with two armies, led by Metatron and Sandalphon. Lilith is the begetter of the powers striving against light. The nature of man's soul, said Kabbalists, is threefold: vegetative, perceptive, and intellectual, each embracing each. It emanates from the upper Sphirot, is composed of the pure elements, for the four elements, either in their pure and spiritual or their gross form, enter into all things, is expansive, separates after death, so that the parts return each to its own place, but reunite to praise God on the Sabbaths and the new moons. With each soul are sent into the world a guardian and an accusing angel. Henry Morley on Reuchlin's Kabbalah. Read by Dana Trell. Now, as the creative light runs round each upper world before coming to ours, it comes to us charged with supernal influence, and such an idea lies at the foundations of Kabbalistical magic. By what secrets to have power over this line of communication with superior worlds, it is for practical Kabbalism to discover. The secret consisted chiefly in the use of names. God, it was said, gave to all things their names. He could have given no name that was not mystically fit. Every such name, therefore, is a word containing divine power, and especially affecting that thing, person, or spirit to which it belongs. The Scripture tells us that there are names written in heaven. Why, it is said, should they be written there if they be useless? Through the knowledge of such divine names, it is affirmed, Moses overcame the sorcerers of Egypt, Elijah brought down fire from heaven, Daniel closed the mouths of lions. But all names by which wonders can be wrought, the mirific word of words, here we come to the main thought of Reuchlin's book, and to the central topic of the oratory of Cornelius, was the concealed name of God, the Shem HaMephorash. Whoever knows the true pronunciation of the name Jehovah, the name from which all other divine names in the world spring, as the branches from a tree, the name that binds together the Sphirot, whoever has that in his mouth, has the world in his mouth. When it is spoken, angels are stirred by the wave of sound. It rules all creatures, works all miracles. It commands all the inferior names of deity which are borne by the several angels that in heaven govern the respective nations of the earth. The Jews had a tradition that when David was on the point of fighting with Goliath, Jashbi, the giant's brother, tossed him up in the air and held a spear below that he might fall upon it. But Abishai, when he saw that, he pronounced the holy name, and David remained in the air until Jashbi's spear no longer threatened him. They said also that the mirific name was among the secrets contained in the Holy of Holies, and that when any person, having entered that shrine of the temple, learnt the word of power, he was roared at as he came out by 2 brazen lions, or bayed at by brazen dogs, until, through terror, he lost recollection of it. Some Jews accounted also by a fable of this nature for our Saviour's miracles. They said that, having been admitted within the Holy of Holies, and having learnt the sacred mystery, he wrote it down upon a tablet, cut open his thigh, and having put the tablet in the wound, closed the flesh over it by uttering the name of wonder. As he passed out, the roaring lions caused the secret to pass from his mind, but afterward he had only to cut out the tablet from his thigh, and, as the beginning of miracles, heal instantly the wound of his own flesh by pronouncing the mirific word. Such Jewish details were, of course, rejected by the Christians, who accepted the essential principles of the Kabbalah. As the name of all power was the hidden name of God, so there were also names of power great, though limited, belonging to angels and evil spirits. To discover the names of spirits by applying to the Hebrew text of Scripture the symbolical Kabbalah was to acquire some of the power they possessed. Thus, it being said of the Sodomites that they were struck with blindness, the Hebrew word for blindness was translated into Chaldee, and the Chaldee word by one of the symbolical processes was made to yield the name of a bad angel, Shabriri, which, being written down, was employed as a charm to cure ophthalmia. A common code of conjuration with these names of power was by the use of amulets, pieces of paper or parchment on which, for certain purposes, certain names were written. At his first entrance into the world, such an amulet with the names Senoi, San Senoi, Semon Galof upon it was slipped round the neck of the newborn child, so that the infant scarcely saw the light before it was collared by the genius of superstition. Another mode of conjuration consisted in the use not of names, but of the Psalms of David. Whole volumes were written upon this use of the Psalms. The first of them, written on doeskin, was supposed to help the birth of children. Others could, it was thought, be so written as to make those who carried them invisible. Others secured favors from princes. others extinguished fires. The transcription of a psalm for any such purpose was no trifling work, because, apart from the necessary care in the formation of letters, some having a mystical reason for being larger than others, it was necessary for the copyist, as soon as he had written down one line, to plunge into a bath. Moreover, that the charms might be the work of a pure man, before beginning every new line of his manuscript, it was thought necessary that he should repeat the plunge. Reuchlin the Mystic. Such were the mysteries of the Hebrew Kabbalah, strangely blending not an unrefined philosophy with basest superstition. It remains for us to form some just opinion of the charm they had for many Christian scholars in the first years of the 16th century. Reuchlin, or Capnio, was of such scholars the leader and the type. As such, indeed, he was accepted by the young Cornelius Agrippa. He was the greatest Hebrew scholar of his day, and had become so by his own natural bent. Born at Pforzheim, of the poorest parents, 32 years before Agrippa came into the world, taught Latin at the town school, and winning in his youth a ducal patron by his tunable voice as a chorister in the court chapel at Baden, by his quick wit and his serene, lively, amiable temper, he never afterwards lacked powerful assistants. The life of Reuchlin is the story of the origin of Greek and Hebrew studies among learned Europeans. He was sent with the Margrave's son, afterwards Bishop of Utrecht, to Paris. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 had caused fugitive Greeks to betake themselves to many European cities where they sometimes gave instruction in their language. Reuchlin, at Paris, learnt Greek from a Spartan, who gave him instruction also in calligraphy, and made him so clever a workman with his pen that he could eke out his means and buy books with money he earned as a Greek copyist. He studied Aristotle with the Spartan. Old John Wessel of Groningen, a disciple of Thomas à Kempis, taught him Hebrew and invited him to a direct study of the Bible. At the age of 20, he was engaged by publishers to write a Latin dictionary, which he called Breviloquus. At the age of 20, he taught Greek publicly, laying his main stress on the study of grammar. The good sense he spoke emptied the benches of the sophisters around him, and produced complaints from old-fashioned professors. It was then urged that all the views disclosed in Greek books were essentially opposed to the spirit and belief of Rome. The monks had no commerce with the language, and when they came to a Greek quotation in a book that they were copying, were used to inscribe the formula Graeca sunt, non leguntur. Reuchlin maintained his ground at 25, wrote a Greek grammar, lectured at Poitiers, and made a licentiate of civil law. His notion of law studies was expressed in a formula that has been applied in other terms to other things. In his first year, the young lawyer knows how to decide all causes. In the second, begins to be uncertain. In the third, acknowledges that he knows nothing, and then first begins to learn. In the last of these stages of progress, the licentiate of Poitiers repaired to Tübingen and practiced as an advocate with such success that he made money and married. At Tübingen, Reuchlin won the confidence of Eberhard of the Beard, became his private secretary and one of his privy councillors, and went with him to Rome in 1482, his age then being 28. At Rome, he distinguished himself as an orator before the Pope, and was considered to speak Latin wonderfully well for a German. After his return to Germany, Reuchlin remained with Eberhard in Stuttgart and became assessor of the Supreme Court at the age of 30, and a year afterwards was elected proctor for the body of the Dominicans throughout all Germany, which unpaid office he held for nearly 30 years. At the age of 31, he received at Tübingen his doctorate, and in the year following, that is to say, in the year of Cornelius Agrippa's birth, he was sent with the two others to Frankfurt, Cologne, and Aix-la-Chapelle on the occasion of the coronation of Maximilian as Roman Emperor. Then it was that Maximilian first became acquainted with him. Reuchlin had then a house at Stuttgart and was known as a great cultivator of learned languages, while he was also high in the favor of his own prince and in constant request as a practitioner of law. In 1490 he was sent to Rome on another mission, and on this way through Florence enjoyed personal intercourse with Giovanni Pico di Mirandola, the scholar who, although a determined antagonist to the astrologers, was a great friend to Kabbalism and the introducer of the Kabbalistic mysteries into the favor of Italian scholars. By him, Reuchlin was further stimulated to the love of Hebrew lore. When 2 years afterwards, Reuchlin was at Linz, on state business with the Emperor Frederick III, it was something indeed that the base-born scholar was raised to the dignity of court palatine, but it was more to Reuchlin that the court physician was a learned Jew, Jehiel Lones, who perfected his intimacy with the Hebrew. His aim, then, was above all things first to study the original text of the Old Testament, and secondly, to read the writings of the Kabbalists. The emperor whose life was then about to close, he died when Reuchlin was at Linz, saw here another way of gratifying the agreeable and kindly scholar, for he not only made Reuchlin a Count Palatine, his arms were a golden altar from which smoke arose with the inscription Ara Capnionis, but he also presented to him a very ancient Hebrew Bible, written carefully on parchment, a treasure then worth 300 gold crowns, which is to be still seen in the library of the Grand Duke Karlsruhe, where it is regarded as the oldest of its kind in Europe. With the knowledge imparted by Jehiel Lones, and the actual text in which all mysteries lay hidden, Reuchlin went home enriched as much as he had been ennobled. Hebrew writing was at that time very rare, and was to be met with chiefly in the hands of Jews. At Hebrew, Reuchlin labored, collecting books and works expounding the Kabbalah whenever possible, and eventually he gave life in Germany, as Giovanni Pico di Mirandola was giving life in Italy, to the Kabbalistic philosophy, the great impulse to this German revival being the publication of the book On the Mirific Word. It first appeared at Basel in the year 1495, the author's age then being 41. It was not published at Tübingen till 1514. The book was regarded as a miracle of heavenly wisdom. Philip Barroaldus told of the Pope's enjoyment, and wrote word also to its author that he had caused not only men of letters, but even statesmen and warriors to betake themselves to studying the mysteries of the Kabbalah. The death of Reuchlin's patron, Eberhard the Elder, soon after his elevation to the rank of Duke in 1495, was followed by a period of misrule in the little state. One of the first acts of Eberhard the Younger was to release his favorite, a dissolute priest named Holzinger, from the prison in which he had been kept by the good counsel of Reuchlin, and for the further discomfiture of the scholar, this man was appointed chancellor over the University of Tübingen. Reuchlin, of course, resigned. He had been long wanted at Heidelberg, and went there to be cherished by a new patron in the Elector Palatine. He showed, as usual, his lively energy by the establishment of a Greek chair, which the monks pronounced upon the spot to be a heresy, and by venting his wrath against Holzinger in a Latin comedy, denouncing dissolute priests, which he called Sergius, or the head of the head. It was written to be acted by students. A Latin comedy was then a rare thing in the land, and the news that Reuchlin had written one was noised abroad. Prudent friends counseled him to beware of such unscrupulous and powerful enemies as he would make if he attacked abuses of the priesthood. He submitted to advice, and as he was notoriously answerable for a comedy, and gossip must be satisfied, he suddenly composed a substitute for that first written. When therefore the day of the performance came, it was found that the Greek professor had composed a comedy against abuses in his own profession. It was a castigation of dishonest advocates, lawyers. Scaenica pro Gymnastica, the piece was called. After 2 years of misrule, Eberhard the Younger took its consequences. He was then deposed, and Holzinger, the monk, sent back to prison. When the bricks are doubled, Moses comes, said Reuchlin, and returned to his old post at Tübingen. Hitherto his life of study had not been unprofitable, nor much benefit as he received through patronage was it a life wanting independence. Whatever I spent in learning, he said, I acquired by teaching. An anecdote of this good-humored scholar may be here interpolated, which displays his character in a half-dozen points of view. He was detained once in an inn when it was raining very heavily, and of course had his book with him. The rain had driven into the common room a large number of country people who were making a great noise. To quiet them, Reuchlin called for a piece of chalk and drew with it a circle on the table before which he sat. Within the circle he then drew a cross, and also within it, on the right side of the cross, he placed, with great solemnity, a cup of water, and on the left he stuck a knife upright. Then placing a book, doubtless a Hebrew one, within the mysterious circle, he began to read, and the rustics who had gathered round him, with their mouths agape, patiently waited for the consequence of all this conjuration. The result was that Reuchlin finished comfortably the chapter he was reading, without being distressed even by a whisper of disturbance. In the year 1502, Reuchlin was elected to the post of General Judge of Alliance under the terms of the Swabian League. His office was to adjudicate in all matters of dispute among confederates and vassals concerning the interests of the emperor as Archduke of Austria, the electors and princes. There was a second judge for prelates, counts, and nobles, a third for imperial cities. This post he held during 11 years. He was holding it, therefore, at the time when the young Cornelius Agrippa undertook to comment publicly at Dole on his book concerning the Mirific word. Reuchlin then being 35 years old and at the summit of his fame, high also in good esteem of Maximilian. 3 years before this date, notwithstanding the great mass of legal business entailed on him by his judicial office, Reuchlin had, to the great help of all students, published a volume of the rudiments of Hebrew, which included both a grammar and a dictionary. This book, he wrote, cost me great trouble and a large part of my fortune. Cornelius no doubt had learnt his Hebrew by help of it, and was already deep in studies, which a few years afterwards brought the monks of Cologne into array against Reuchlin himself, their hostilities somewhat embittered by an inkling of the Latin comedy that was not to be quite suppressed. Cornelius, however, was the first to feel the power of such enemies. By the Epistolae Obscurorum Virorum, the monks were destined to come off much worsted from their battle against Reuchlin and the scholars who defended his fair name. Of their fortune in the battle fought against Cornelius Agrippa, it is one part of this history to tell. Reuchlin wrote at a later period, 1517, a book upon the Kabbalistic art. If it is written God created heaven and earth, he interpreted that to mean spirit and matter. The spirit consisting of the angels and ministers by whom the ways of man are influenced. Magic, he said, dealt with evil spirits, but the true Kabbalah only with the good. He believed in astrology, and so indeed did Luther and Melanchthon. Giovanni Pico di Mirandola at Florence, while adopting the Kabbalah, was very singular in his hostility to the belief in the influence of the stars. His own faith in Kabbalism Reuchlin enforced thus: God, out of love to his people, has revealed the hidden mysteries to some of them, and these could find in the dead letters the living spirit. For Scripture consists of single letters, visible signs which stand by a certain connection with the angels as celestial and spiritual emanations from God. By the pronunciation of the one, the others also are affected. But with a true Kabbalist who penetrates the whole connection of the earthly with the heavenly, these signs, rightly placed in connection with each other, are a way of putting him into immediate union with the spirits, who through that are bound to satisfy his wishes. In his book called Capnio, or The Mirific Word, expounded at Dole by Cornelius Agrippa, Reuchlin placed the Christian system in the center of old heathen philosophies, considering many of the doctrines of Pythagoras and Plato as having been taken from, not introduced into, the wisdom of the Kabbalists. The argument is stated in the form of a dialogue, which is immediately preceded by a summary of its intentions, that may very well suffice here for a summary of its contents. Receive, then, in this book the argument on the mirific word of the three philosophers, whom I have feigned to be holding such dispute among themselves as the controversies proper to their sex would occasion, as to the best elucidation of the hidden properties of sacred names, out of which, great as they are in number and importance, occasion will at last be more easily afforded for selecting one name that is above all names supremely mirific and beatific. And this you may know the whole matter in brief. Sidonius at first ascribed to the school of Epicurus, but found afterwards, nullius jurare in verba magistri, an unfettered philosopher travels about to satisfy his thirst for knowledge, and after many experiences, enters Swabia, where he meets in the town of Pforzheim two philosophers, Baruch, a Jew, and Capnio, Reuchlin himself, a Christian with whom he disserts upon many systems, and presently upon the knowledge itself of divine and human things, upon opinion, faith, miracles, the power of words and figures, secret operations, and the mysteries of seals. In this way, question arises concerning the sacred names and consecrated characters of all nations which have anything excellent in their philosophy, or not unworthy in their ceremonies. An enumeration of symbols is made by each speaker zealously on behalf of the rites cherished in his sect, until at last, Capnio, in the third book, collects out of all that is holy one name, Yehoshua, in which is gathered up the virtue and power of all sacred things, and which is eternally, supremely blessed.